Tanzania, day 3 of the honeymoon. And here's the question no one asked her before she left. Do you know what lives in the freshwater lakes of East Africa? The game drive at dawn had already delivered something extraordinary. A pride of lions moving through the golden grass like living shadows, close enough to hear them breathe. By dusk, the couple had watched a herd of elephants cross the horizon in silhouette. The trip was already everything they'd hoped it would be. Then they found the lake. It sat in a shallow valley ringed by acacia trees, the water catching the late afternoon light in a way that looked almost arranged. Too perfect, like a painting someone had placed there specifically for them. Clear water, warm air, no warning signs. Their guide said nothing that suggested caution. She waded in first, and then she swam, and for 20 minutes she floated in that lake on the 3rd day of her marriage, in one of the most beautiful places on earth. She described it later as the happy moment of the entire trip. She was 28 years old, healthy, no pre-existing conditions, no reason to be afraid. The water was warm, the light was perfect. She felt nothing. But something felt her. What found her in that lake has a name: Schistosoma haematobium. It is a parasitic flatworm with a life cycle that seems engineered by something with a very specific kind of patience. Adult worms don't live in soil or in food. They live in human blood vessels. And to get there, they take a route so strange, so precise, that it's difficult to believe it evolved by accident. The cycle begins when infected human urine reaches freshwater. Eggs shed into the lake hatch into free-swimming larvae called miracidia, which have roughly 24 hours to find their intermediate host, the Bilharzia snail, a small freshwater snail common in East African lakes, the kind that clings to submerged rocks and vegetation in shallow, warm water. Inside the snail, the parasite multiplies, not by tens but by thousands. After several weeks, the snail releases the next larval stage into the water, cercariae, fork-tailed, microscopic, and actively hunting. Cercariae detect human presence through body heat and the chemical signature of skin within seconds of contact. They don't wait for a cut or a wound. They don't need one. Using enzymatic secretion, they drill through intact, unbroken skin. The entire penetration process takes under 30 seconds. She was in the water for 20 minutes. The World Health Organization classifies Schistosomiasis as a neglected tropical disease, second only to malaria in global parasitic disease burden. Over 240 million people worldwide are currently infected. Most of them never knew the moment it happened. Once through the skin, the cercariae shed their tails and transform. They are now called schistosomulae, juvenile worms, and they are beginning a journey through her body that will last for years. They enter the lymphatic system first, then work their way to the lungs, moving through tissue in a migration that produces no symptoms obvious enough to name. From the lungs, they enter the bloodstream and travel to the portal veins of the liver, where, over the course of 4 to 6 weeks, they mature into adult worms and do something that seems almost intimate in its biology. They pair up, male and female. The male folds his body into a groove called the gynecophoral canal, and the female lives inside him, permanently joined. Then they migrate together to their final destination, the vesical venous plexus, the dense network of blood vessels that surrounds the bladder. And there, the female begins to lay eggs, up to 300 per day. Some of those eggs push through the bladder wall and exit the body in urine. This is how the cycle restarts, how the lake stays infected, how the next swimmer is already being prepared for. But many eggs don't make it out. They become trapped in the bladder wall tissue, and this is where the real destruction begins. Her immune system is not passive. It sees the eggs, it responds, it walls them off in structures called granulomas, nodules of immune cells and fibrous tissue that calcify over time into hard, permanent deposits. This is not the worm eating her from the inside. This is her own body, doing exactly what it's supposed to do, fighting something it can never fully clear, slowly turning the lining of her bladder into stone. Around 4 to 6 weeks after the swim, she may have felt feverish, tired, a cough that didn't quite resolve. Hives, perhaps. This is called Katayama fever, an acute allergic reaction to the mass migration of juvenile worms through the body. It passes. She probably thought it was a travel bug. She probably thought she'd gotten over it. 6 months after Tanzania, she noticed blood in her urine. Not dramatic, not a hemorrhage. A tinge, enough to notice in the bowl, not enough to panic. She made an appointment with her OB-GYN. The workup was standard and reasonable. A UTI was ruled out. Kidney stones were not visible on imaging. No obvious pathology was identified. She was reassured. Told to monitor. A year out from the honeymoon, the pelvic cramping started. Intermittent, dull, the kind of pain that's easy to rationalize away on a busy day. She returned to her doctor. The pelvic exam was normal. Endometriosis was raised as a possibility. More monitoring was recommended. By year 2, the bleeding was more consistent. A second imaging study was ordered. Still no definitive finding. And here's the thing that needs to be said plainly. Schistosomiasis was never placed on the differential diagnosis. Not because her physicians were careless, but because a 2019 CDC report identified schistosomiasis as among the most underdiagnosed parasitic infections in American travelers returning from sub-Saharan Africa, with fewer than 1 in 5 cases correctly identified at first presentation. The symptoms, blood in urine, pelvic pain, fatigue, are identical to a dozen conditions that American clinicians see every week. Endometriosis, interstitial cystitis, recurrent UTI. The question, where have you traveled in the last 3 years, and did you swim in any fresh water, is not part of a standard workup. It should be. It wasn't. She was not failed by one bad doctor. She was failed by a system that never trained its physicians to ask the right question. In year 3, a urologist ordered a cystoscopy. A camera, threaded through the urethra and into the bladder, transmitted a live image of the organ's interior wall. What the urologist saw was not the clean, smooth, pink surface of a healthy bladder. The entire wall was covered in calcified granulomas, white hardened nodules of scar tissue, packed so densely that they had distorted the architecture of the organ entirely. The bladder wall, normally supple and elastic, capable of expanding and contracting with each fill and void, had been replaced in large sections by fibrotic, non-viable tissue. It was not inflamed. It was not infected in the conventional sense. It had been calcified, hardened from within, over 3 years of continuous egg deposition, into something that no longer functioned as living tissue. Biopsies confirmed it. Calcified schistosoma haematobium eggs, embedded throughout the wall, some still containing visible myristidia, the next generation already formed, waiting for water that would never come. The diagnosis arrived 3 years after a 20-minute swim in a lake that looked perfectly safe. There is something else the urologist knew, something documented in WHO literature, and classified formally by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. Chronic S. haematobium infection is a Group 1 carcinogen. It causes squamous cell carcinoma of the bladder. The longer the infection persists untreated, the higher the cancer risk climbs. Studies published in the journal Lancet Infectious Diseases put the attributable fraction of bladder cancer in endemic regions at over 40%. She had been untreated for 3 years. That conversation, the one about what this infection does to cancer risk over time, happened in a room where she had just been told her bladder wall was largely destroyed. It was not a gentle afternoon. The surgery was a partial cystectomy. Surgeons removed the sections of the bladder wall so extensively damaged by granulomatous inflammation that preservation was not possible. Tissue that had stopped being tissue in any functional sense. The remaining viable sections were reconstructed using a segment of bowel, reshaped and sutured into a neobladder. Post-operatively, she carried a catheter for 6 months while the reconstruction healed and her body learned to accommodate something new in place of what had been there before. What that looks like, practically, is this. She was 31 years old. She had been married for 3 years. She planned her days around drainage schedules. She chose restaurants based on bathroom access. She could not travel easily. She could not swim. The worm was gone. Praziquantel, the anti-schistosomal treatment, was administered and cleared the remaining adult worms from her bloodstream. But the 3 years of egg-laying that preceded that pill could not be undone. The drug works. It works remarkably well. But it works on living worms, not on calcified scar tissue. It cannot reverse what the immune response already built. She survived. The reconstruction was successful. But successful in this context means functional, not restored. It means she is alive and managing. It does not mean she is unchanged. Here's what needs to be understood about the geography of this risk. Lake Victoria, the largest lake in Africa, shared by Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania, has documented active schistosomiasis transmission in both fishing communities and tourists. Lake Tanganyika, the world's second deepest lake and a destination for overland travelers and safari tourists, has confirmed S. haematobium transmission. Lake Malawi, a UNESCO World Heritage Site beloved by backpackers for its clear water and its beauty, has transmission so well documented that it has its own colloquial name among travel medicine specialists, Malawi travelers' Schistosomiasis. The CDC Travel Health Notice System does not require mandatory pre-travel counseling on schistosomiasis for travelers to these regions. There is no warning on the safari booking confirmation. There is no sign at the lake. The treatment, praziquantel, costs under $1 per dose in endemic countries. A full course for a returning traveler in the United States costs roughly $30 to $50. It is a single-day treatment. Taken within weeks of exposure, before eggs calcify into granulomas, before the immune response begins its slow construction of scar tissue, it clears the infection completely. The window for that pill closes slowly, but it does close. And most travelers never ask for it because they do not know they were ever at risk. If you have swum in freshwater in sub-Saharan Africa, any freshwater, including lakes that looked clear, lakes that looked safe, lakes where no one said anything, you should be tested. The test is a urine microscopy or a serology test called an ELISA antibody assay, available through travel medicine clinics and infectious disease specialists. Testing should occur at least 6 to 8 weeks post-exposure to allow antibody levels to develop. If the result is positive, praziquantel, 40 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, in 2 doses on the same day. If the result is negative, but the exposure was high risk, some travel medicine specialists recommend empirical treatment regardless. The key point is this: schistosomiasis does not announce itself. Hematuria, blood in urine, is the first sign, and it is easy to dismiss, easy to attribute to something more familiar, something that fits more neatly into what a doctor in Chicago, London, or Sydney is trained to look for. If you have unexplained blood in urine after travel to East Africa, schistosomiasis must be on the differential. The CDC Travelers Health website, the International Society of Travel Medicine Clinic Locator, and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine NTD resources are all starting points. This information exists. It is not hidden. It is simply not given to the people who need it before they need it. If any part of this story sounds like yours, if you've been to these lakes, if you've had symptoms you couldn't explain, drop your situation in the comments. Not just because it matters to hear from you, but because other people reading those comments may recognize themselves in what you describe. This is one of those conditions where a single comment thread might genuinely prompt someone to get tested. And if you want to keep following cases like this one, real infections, real consequences, the biology of what happens inside a body when something goes wrong in a way that medicine almost missed, subscribing here means you'll be among the people who actually know this material. Not medical professionals necessarily. Just people who've decided that understanding these things is worth their time. Go back now to the lake. Day 3. The acacia trees. The light on the water. She wades in laughing, and everything the viewer now carries, the cercariae drifting in the shallows, the Bilharzia snails on the submerged rocks, the 30-second clock that started the moment her skin touched the surface, all of it layers underneath that image like a photograph developing in reverse. She didn't fail. She wasn't reckless. She was on her honeymoon in one of the most beautiful places on earth, and not one person in the chain between her and that water, not the guide, not the travel agent, not a pre-travel health appointment, answered the question this video opened with. No one told her what lives in the freshwater lakes of East Africa. No one gave her the single sentence that would have changed everything. Don't swim in freshwater lakes here. And if you do, see a travel medicine doctor when you get home. That sentence costs nothing to say. The surgery cost her a bladder. She has told her story publicly because she wants to be the warning she never received. She and her husband are still together. She has a reconstructed bladder and a life that continues. The lake is still there. The acacia trees are still there. The snails are still on the rocks in the shallows. And somewhere right now, at this exact moment, someone is standing at the water's edge on what might be the happiest day of their lives, about to wade in, and no one is saying anything.